The current state of the U.S. economy may be confusing for some Americans.
That's right. Historic inflation and fears of a recession have gone hand in hand with a booming labor market. Last week, the Labor Department reported the U.S. added 528,000 jobs in July, adding to a total of 3.3 million jobs created since the end of 2021. But according to the Commerce Department, the U.S. economy has shrunk by roughly $125 million during that period. So for more on these confusing indicators, let's bring in David j.lynch. He's a global economics correspondent for the Washington Post. David, welcome. Your most recent article parses through all of this. So tell us how it's possible for the economy to simultaneously shrink while also producing 500,000 new jobs.
Yeah, it's a good question because it is a story of two very different economies depending upon which report card you look at. And some of it could be a data question. The GDP data, which tallies up the value of all the goods and services produced in the country in the course of a quarter, and that has been showing the economy getting smaller over the course of the first half of this year. That data, though, gets revised twice. So it's quite possible that some of the negative numbers that we saw, particularly in the second quarter, where it was a decline of 0.9%, quite possible that could get revised upward to a flat zero maybe, or even positive, but we won't know for some time. So that's part of the issue. The other explanation could be productivity, that workers, as we've come out of the pandemic and are trying to restructure the economy, could be not as efficient as they were a year ago. Now, some economists say that that's unlikely, but we're not going to know the answer to that question anytime soon. The early indications on the productivity front, though, are pretty distressing. The numbers, some out just today, show both quarters so far this year a decline, and a historic decline at that.
Well, on the question of workers, we see help wanted signs everywhere, or we hear of shortages in various industries, in teaching, in the airline industry, to name a few. So has the pandemic permanently altered who is actually participating in the economy?
Yeah, there are some early signs of that. The Federal Reserve System economists have put out some research from the Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond, in fact, that suggests that the pandemic has had a permanent imprint on the labor force, that it encouraged older workers, people over 55, who may have been thinking about retirement in 2019 or early 2020, but maybe not yet sure that they could afford it or that they wanted to do it. But then the pandemic made going back to work scary, potentially a negative effect on your health. And so some of those workers decided to retire early. Others, predominantly women, were stuck at home taking care of younger kids or perhaps older relatives with health issues, and didn't have adequate child care to enable them to return to their jobs. So we've seen that as well. But it's worth keeping in mind we're really going through a very unusual period. The last 2 years are like nothing any of us have seen in our lifetimes. And a lot of the economics models that people are trying to use to predict what's going to happen are based on past experiences that don't correspond to what we're going through.
That's a really good point, and sort of brings me to my next question. Since this is sort of unprecedented and these models don't necessarily apply, how is all of this changing how the Fed is combating inflation? Is the Fed sort of relying on these old models, or are they trying to come up with a new formula?
It's a little of both. They can only use what they have. They're trying to supplement it with some new sources of data, the sort of real-time data that we get on everything from restaurant reservations to air travel, et cetera. But the Fed really has one big tool to manage the economy, and it's interest rates. And that affects the demand side. The Fed can raise interest rates. That makes it more expensive for us to get a mortgage to buy a house or a loan to buy a new car. And so at the margin, that depresses demand for those products and cools off the economy a bit. But the problem for the Fed is that much of the inflation problem is coming from the supply side. Our supply chains are still not 100% of the way they should be operating.
Right.
And there isn't much the Fed can do about that with interest rates.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. All right, well, David Lynch, thank you for joining us and breaking it down for us. We appreciate it.